In early 1944, on a test field in Dayton, Ohio, a pilot prepared to push a P-51B Mustang beyond its conventional limits. His hand rested firmly on the throttle as he increased power well past the standard war emergency setting. The engine's roar intensified as boost pressure climbed to 75 inches of mercury, fueled by an experimental new aviation gasoline labeled simply as Grade 150. The airspeed indicator surged past speeds previously considered the ceiling for Allied fighters. At an altitude of 25,000 feet, the Mustang accelerated to 448 miles per hour. Observing from the ground, test engineers exchanged silent glances as the pilot's voice crackled over the radio with his report. This was not merely an incremental improvement in performance, it was a transformative leap enabled by a chemically enhanced fuel, one so powerful it challenged every assumption the Luftwaffe held about American fighter aircraft capabilities. The dramatic shift in air combat potential stemmed not from an innovative airframe or new tactical doctrine, but from the development of a fuel that allowed existing aircraft to surpass expectations. German pilots were unaware that Allied fuel chemists had achieved a level of performance that Nazi synthetic fuel programs could never replicate. While Luftwaffe fighters were constrained by B4 fuel, which rated at 91 octane on the lean mixture scale, and their superior 3 fuel only approached the performance of Allied 130 grade gasoline, American engineered, the practical implications were extraordinary. A P-51 Mustang operating on the standard 130 grade fuel could reach 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. When powered by 150 grade fuel, the same aircraft flown under identical conditions exceeded 448 miles per hour. German pilots, who had long respected the Mustang for its extended range and high-altitude performance, were now confronted with a fundamental change in the dynamics of aerial combat. At the time, the Luftwaffe's primary fighters, the Messerschmitt Bf 109G and the Focke-Wulf 190A, could achieve maximum speeds of roughly 400 and 408 miles per hour respectively at altitude. Engaging Mustangs fueled with 130 grade gasoline still allowed for roughly balanced confrontations. With 150 grade fuel, however, the technological advantage lay squarely with the Allies, placing German pilots at a disadvantage that could not be overcome by experience or tactical ingenuity alone. The origins of this advantage trace back to peacetime research by petroleum chemists who understood the relationship between octane rating and combustion efficiency. Higher octane fuel allowed air fuel mixtures to withstand greater compression before detonating spontaneously, producing more power per engine cycle. This translated directly into higher speeds and increased operational ceilings for aircraft. While the science was relatively straightforward, the industrial engineering required to manufacture high-octane aviation fuel at scale was exceptionally demanding. In 1940, with war already engulfing Europe, U.S. aviation fuel production focused on 87-octane gasoline. This was adequate for commercial planes and training aircraft, but insufficient for the high-performance fighters that would dominate modern aerial warfare. Britain, facing numerical inferiority against the Luftwaffe, collaborated with American oil companies to develop 100-octane fuel, which became available just in time for the Battle of Britain. The performance gains were immediate. Spitfires and Hurricanes equipped with 100-octane fuel achieved speed increases of 30 to 40 miles per hour at altitude, and climb rates improved by 500 to 1,000 feet per minute. German pilots who had previously held an advantage found themselves operating on equal footing. The introduction of 130-grade fuel represented a further advancement. Rated at 130 on a rich mixture scale, it became the foundation of Allied air power through 1943, powering a range of key aircraft: Merlin engines in Spitfires and Mustangs, Allison engines in P-38 Lightnings, and the enormous Pratt & Whitney R2800 radials in P-47 Thunderbolts. Production accelerated under the guidance of General James Doolittle, a tireless advocate for high-octane aviation fuel who had spent the 1,930 seconds lobbying both military leaders and oil companies to invest in research and large-scale production. By the time experimental 150-grade fuel reached operational testing, the Allies had quietly redefined the aerial balance of power. Existing fighters could now outperform any expectations set by enemy intelligence, delivering higher speed, greater altitude capability, and a decisive technological edge, one that would influence the course of the air war over Europe in ways the Luftwaffe had not anticipated. By the year 1943, the Allied war effort had achieved a decisive advantage in aviation fuel production. 17 refineries under Allied control were actively manufacturing high-octane gasoline using the catalytic cracking techniques refined by the French immigrant engineer Eugene Houdry. In the United States alone, refineries were turning out millions of gallons of this specialized fuel each month, providing the essential energy to sustain the extensive bomber campaigns over Germany, as well as the fighter escorts tasked with protecting these bombing missions. In stark contrast, Germany's aviation fuel output remained severely constrained. The German war machine relied heavily on synthetic fuel derived from coal through the Burgess process. While chemically sound, this method was extremely slow and demanded substantial resources, making it impossible for Germany to match the sheer volume of high-octane fuel produced by the Allies. Even under optimal conditions, German refineries were capable of producing only a small fraction of the premium aviation gasoline that the Americans and British could deploy. Most German fighters operated on B4 fuel, which had an approximate octane rating of 91 when measured on the lean mixture scale. Their higher performance Cree fuel, mainly used in BMW 801-powered Focke-Wulf 192nd and select variants of the Messerschmitt aircraft, had octane characteristics roughly comparable to the Allies' 113-octane grade gasoline, though its availability was extremely limited. By 1944, roughly two-thirds of German aviation fuel production was allocated to Cree fuel, yet in absolute terms this still represented only a minor portion of the output being generated by Allied refineries. To fully understand why high-octane fuel was such a game-changer, it is essential to grasp the basic principles of internal combustion engines. Octane ratings quantify a fuel's resistance to premature detonation. When a piston compresses the fuel-air mixture during the engine's compression stroke, both temperature and pressure rise sharply. If the mixture ignites spontaneously before the spark plug fires, the resulting detonation creates an uncontrolled explosion that can damage or destroy critical engine components. Fuel with a higher octane rating can withstand greater compression before detonating, allowing engines to operate at higher power levels safely. By definition, octane ratings are capped at 100, which corresponds to the detonation resistance of pure iso-octane. To achieve performance beyond this baseline, engineers relied on what were called performance numbers, which indicate the extent to which a fuel can tolerate compression above pure iso-octane. For instance, a fuel with a performance number of 150 can withstand 50% more compression than iso-octane before detonating. Achieving such fuels required careful chemical engineering, including the addition of anti-nick agents like tetraethyl lead and precise blending of aromatic hydrocarbons such as toluene and xylene. Throughout 1942 and 1943, British chemists at the Royal Aircraft Establishment conducted extensive trials with numerous fuel blends, seeking an optimal balance between Simultaneously, American researchers at Wright Field carried out parallel investigations, exchanging data with their British counterparts to accelerate development. By early 1943, both nations had produced experimental batches of a fuel designated as 150 grade. While the name suggested an impossible octane rating of 150, it actually referred to a fuel with a performance number of 100. This fuel, easily identifiable by its purple dye, underwent rigorous testing over the course of the year. The results exceeded expectations. Aircraft powered by Merlin engines, when supplied with 150 grade fuel, could operate at manifold pressures of 75 inches of mercury, compared to 67 inches achievable with 130 grade fuel. This increase translated directly into higher horsepower. For example, a Packard-built Merlin Vone 1657 engine, which powered the P-51 Mustang, produced 1,490 horsepower under standard military power settings with 130 grade fuel. The same engine, operating on 150-grade fuel under war emergency power, generated 1,720 horsepower in the P-51B variant equipped with the W1650 3 Merlin, pushing peak output close to 1,600 horsepower. Flight testing confirmed that these performance improvements were consistent across all phases of flight. Maximum speed at altitude increased by approximately 25 to 30 miles per hour, and climb rates improved by several hundred feet per minute. Crucially, these gains required no modifications to the aircraft itself. A Mustang that flew on 130-grade fuel one day could, simply by switching to 150-grade fuel the next, demonstrate significantly enhanced performance. Recognizing the operational advantage this provided, Allied Command authorized the introduction of 150-grade fuel to fighter squadrons in early 1944, cementing a strategic edge that German forces could not match. The timing of this development was critical. By early 1944, the 8th Air Force, operating out of England and carrying out daylight strategic bombing missions deep into German territory, was experiencing losses that were becoming increasingly unsustainable. Even though the first P-51 Mustangs had entered service in December 1943, German fighter defenses were still inflicting significant casualties on American bomber formations. What American military planners required was more than just a long-range escort fighter. They needed an aircraft fast enough that enemy interceptors could neither easily disengage nor dictate the terms of combat. In May 1944, the first shipments of 150-octane aviation fuel reached England. Its allocation was tightly regulated. Not all fighter units received the new fuel immediately. Instead, distribution began with select squadrons to ensure both logistical control and careful assessment of its impact in combat. Meanwhile, the British Royal Air Force, which had conducted much of the initial testing, also started supplying certain squadrons with the high-octane fuel. Priority was given to units engaged in high-speed interception tasks, particularly those assigned to counter the German V-1 flying bombs that started targeting London in June 1944. The V-1 second traveled at roughly 400 mph at very low altitudes. Successfully intercepting them demanded fighters capable of matching or surpassing that velocity close to the ground, where the density of the air limited aircraft performance. British fighters such as the Hawker Tempest and the Spitfire Mackay Fort were only marginally effective against the V-1 second. Mustangs operating on standard fuel struggled to keep pace, whereas those using 150-octane fuel possessed a performance margin sufficient to reliably engage and destroy these fast-moving weapons. On June 18, 1944, Major R.E. Turner of the 356th Fighter Squadron achieved one of the first notable successes by using his P-51 to tip the wing of a V-1, forcing it off course and causing it to crash, a tactic that would be replicated at least 16 times during the campaign. This maneuver demanded extraordinary speed, precision, and control, requiring the pilot to position his wingtip within inches of the V-1's wing before exploiting the airflow to alter its trajectory. The first significant combat deployment of 150-octane fuel by American P-51 units coincided with the Normandy landings in June 1944. 8th Air Force fighter groups, tasked with securing air superiority over the invasion zones, used the enhanced fuel for bomber escort missions and combat air patrols. German pilots soon reported encounters with Mustangs exhibiting performance far beyond what they had previously experienced. Luftwaffe intelligence collected accounts describing American fighters that could evade interception effortlessly, accelerate at will, and appear to have seemingly limitless power reserves. Initially, these observations were dismissed as exaggerations or the result of pilot fatigue and stress. German intelligence officers reasoned that their own pilots were simply overwhelmed by numbers and losses, not confronted by aircraft with fundamentally superior performance. This judgment was incorrect, though the full extent of the Mustang's capabilities would not be. One of the Luftwaffe's most experienced aces, Garal, credited with 275 aerial victories primarily on the Eastern Front, flew missions against American fighters over Germany in 1944. In post-war interviews conducted during the 1970 seconds and 1980 seconds, he reflected on his experiences facing late-war P-51 seconds. He recalled being struck by the Mustang's speed, climbing ability, and high-altitude performance. Gural also later tested captured American aircraft including the P-51, P-47, and P-38 and consistently singled out the Mustang as particularly impressive, confirming the unprecedented advantages it had provided Allied air forces in the final year of the conflict. During aerial engagements, many German pilots failed to recognize that they were up against fighters whose capabilities had been chemically enhanced well beyond their original design limits. The P-51 Mustangs they faced were operating at engine settings that the aircraft's designers had never anticipated. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, produced under license by Packard, had been meticulously engineered with strict attention to thermal thresholds, bearing durability, and detonation safety margins. Pushing the engine to higher boost levels meant these tolerances were being tested to their maximum. The introduction of 150-octane aviation fuel was a game-changer. It enabled pilots to exploit these extreme power settings without triggering destructive engine knocking, a problem that would have been inevitable with lower-grade fuels under the same pressures. The effectiveness of this fuel relied on the intricate interplay of hydrocarbon molecules, atmospheric oxygen, heat, and pressure within the combustion chamber. The key ingredient, tetraethyl lead, acted as an anti-knock agent by interrupting the chemical reactions that cause premature ignition. However, this innovation came with significant drawbacks. Tetraethyl lead was highly toxic, necessitating careful handling by ground personnel, and it tended to leave residue on spark plugs, valves, and cylinder walls, which accelerated wear and demanded more frequent maintenance. For fighter squadrons using 150-octane fuel, the maintenance challenges were immediate. Spark plugs fouled more quickly, cylinder walls wore faster, and engines required more frequent inspections and overhauls. American ground crews adapted efficiently, shortening plug replacement intervals, increasing engine checks, and revising overhaul schedules. Despite the additional labor, the performance benefits of the high-octane fuel were deemed worth the extra effort. Pilots also had to adjust their flight techniques. Manifold safely, but overboosting remained a serious risk, particularly at low altitudes where denser air increased stress on the engine. Managing fuel consumption became critical. While the 150-grade fuel offered a substantial increase in power, using maximum boost dramatically increased fuel burn, posing a challenge on long-range missions such as bomber escorts to Berlin. Pilots needed to carefully balance periods of full power with more economical cruising to ensure they had enough fuel for the return trip. Reports from the summer and fall of 1944 document the impact clearly. Fighter groups in the 8th Air Force reported a noticeable improvement in their kill-to-loss ratios. Mustangs equipped with 150-octane fuel were more capable of intercepting German aircraft attempting to attack Allied bomber formations. Previously, Luftwaffe fighters could strike quickly and escape before Allied fighters could respond. After the new fuel's deployment, those German aircraft found themselves unable to evade the Mustang's superior speed. A representative incident occurred on August 6, 1944, involving Lieutenant Hollis Bud Nalin of the 357th Fighter Group. During Operation Frantic, a series of missions to Soviet airfields, Nalin, flying his P-51D Hellsbells fueled with 150-octane aviation gas, engaged a Messerschmitt Bf-109 piloted. Nalin's speed advantage allowed him to close the gap rapidly and deliver a precise burst of fire that crippled the enemy plane's cooling system. Low on both fuel and ammunition, Nalin disengaged after the attack, acknowledging the German pilot with a wave before resuming his escort duties. Schack managed to perform a forced belly landing near German positions, preserving his aircraft but losing the fight. This episode illustrates the transformative effect of high-octane fuel on air combat. By allowing American pilots to safely push engines to extreme performance levels, it shifted the tactical balance in the air war over Europe, giving Mustangs the speed and endurance to dominate engagements that had previously favored the Luftwaffe. For 4 decades, Shack was puzzled by why the American pilot had not delivered the final blow, unaware that Neylan had assumed the plane had sustained only partial damage rather than being entirely incapacitated. When historians eventually traced both aviators and facilitated a reunion in Germany, Shack conceded that the American Mustang had exhibited capabilities far beyond anything he had previously faced. The speed at which Neylan had closed the distance and the abundant power reserves on display were unprecedented in Shack's experience. The encounter left a lasting psychological impression on Luftwaffe pilots. Already contending with numerical inferiority and the overwhelming presence of Allied forces, German pilots were now confronted with American fighters that seemed to operate without performance limits. Their tactical choices became sharply constrained. They could attempt mass assaults, betting that superior numbers might overpower the escorts. Alternatively, they could avoid engagements to preserve both aircraft and personnel. Any direct confrontation, however, risked near certain destruction at the hands of Mustangs, which combined higher speed, superior maneuverability, and increasingly aggressive, confident American pilots. Reichsmarschall Hermann reportedly remarked upon observing P-51 Mustangs patrolling Berlin that he recognized the war was effectively lost. His statement captured the strategic crisis facing German air forces. The Mustang's extended range meant no part of Germany was safe from American daylight bombing raids. This vulnerability intensified after mid-1944, when the Allies introduced high-performance aviation fuel. German intelligence teams eventually acquired samples of the Allied 150 grade fuel from captured drop tanks and wrecked aircraft. Laboratory analyses confirmed what Luftwaffe pilots had long suspected: the fuel offered capabilities beyond the reach of German synthetic aviation fuels. Although some late-war German Quay fuel reportedly approached the performance of 150 grade gasoline, production was sporadic and quality inconsistent. Allied bombing campaigns targeting synthetic fuel plants, including major operations against facilities at Luna in May and June 1944, further restricted Germany's ability to produce sufficient quantities. By late 1944, fuel rationing became widespread. Fighter units received priority allocations, yet even these planes operated under severe limitations. Pilot training programs were drastically reduced, resulting in many new Luftwaffe aviators reaching operational squadrons with minimal flight experience. In contrast, American pilots typically logged hundreds of hours before seeing combat, giving them a significant edge. Before the introduction of 150 grade fuel from January through May 1944, American bomber missions faced loss rates of roughly 3 to 6%, a manageable but costly attrition. After June 1944, following the deployment of the new fuel and the attainment of air superiority, losses fell below 2% per sortie, while fighter kill counts surged. Between late 1943 and May 1945, American P-51 units under the 8th, 9th, and 15th Air Forces claimed nearly 4,950 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, a substantial portion occurring after June 1944. The experienced German pilot corps, which entered 1944 with considerable combat knowledge despite heavy casualties on the Eastern Front, was systematically depleted. By the time of D-Day on June 6, 1944, only 2 Luftwaffe aircraft were spotted over the Normandy beaches. While the Luftwaffe still possessed thousands of fighters on paper, operational limitations including fuel shortages, lack of trained pilots, and reduced tactical flexibility rendered the force largely ineffective. A closer look at 150 grade aviation fuel explains part of this transformation. With a lean mixture octane rating of 100, the fuel resisted engine knock at standard cruising power, comparable to pure isooctane. Under rich mixture conditions, its 150 rating allowed engines to tolerate 50% higher compression than isooctane at maximum power. This dual capability enabled pilots to fly efficiently over long distances and switch to high power settings for combat without fear of engine detonation. Handling the fuel required strict precautions due to its elevated tetraethyl lead content. Ground crews used protective clothing, promptly cleaned up spills to prevent lead exposure, and clearly labeled fuel trucks and storage tanks to avoid mixing different grades by mistake. The combination of superior aircraft, advanced fuel technology, and experienced, well-trained pilots gave the Allies a decisive edge. German tactical options dwindled, pilot attrition mounted, and the Luftwaffe's ability to defend its skies was fundamentally compromised, setting the stage for the final Allied advances over Europe. Despite rigorous safety measures, the record of accidents remained remarkably low. Incidents in the industrial sector were uncommon. Transitioning frontline squadrons to the new fuel required focused pilot instruction. Aviators were briefed on the characteristics of the higher-octane fuel and introduced to revised engine operation protocols. Limits for manifold pressure were adjusted upward, and operational directives outlined precisely when maximum power could be safely employed. Aircraft themselves required no structural modifications, as engines, fuel systems, and all related components were fully compatible with both standard and high-octane grades. This dual compatibility greatly simplified both logistical planning and field operations. Production figures from this period illustrate the sheer scale of Allied industrial mobilization which Germany could not rival. Between May 1944 and April 1945, the U.S. 8th Air Force consumed more than 53 million gallons of 150-octane aviation gasoline. Allied refineries likely produced over 200 million gallons of this fuel during active operations. Every gallon represented a complex chain of processes, sophisticated refining, chemical additives such as tetraethyl lead, rigorous quality control, transportation across the Atlantic, secure storage, and delivery to numerous airfields scattered across Europe. The industrial output of the United States in 1944 reached levels that, at the time, appeared nearly miraculous. Bombers were assembled in the thousands, fighters in the tens of thousands, and Liberty ships were launched from shipyards faster than Germany could sink them. Oil refineries generated aviation gasoline in volumes surpassing Germany's total production of all fuel grades combined. These achievements were underpinned by decades of industrial growth, abundant natural resources, a homeland insulated from aerial bombardment, and a labor force that included millions of women stepping into factory roles to sustain the war effort. The Royal Air Force also incorporated 150-octane fuel extensively in its European operations. Squadrons flying Spitfire Mach 14s, Tempest Verses, and Mustang Mach 3s and IVs were prioritized for allocations of the new fuel. RAF pilots observed performance improvements on par with those reported by their American counterparts. The Tempest, already among the fastest piston engine fighters of the era, became even more formidable. Units equipped with Tempests achieved notable success against V-1 flying bombs. From June through September 1944, RAF 150 winged Tempests destroyed 638 V-1 second, with No. 3 Squadron alone claiming 305. Squadron leader Joseph Bry accounted for 59, Belgian ace Remy van Liarde for 44, and wing commander Roland Beaumont for 31. Other high-performing interceptors included the Mosquito, credited with 623 kills, the Spitfire 14 with 303, and the Mustang with 232. The enhanced performance margin provided by the new fuel proved advantageous in every operational role. The combat effectiveness of 150-octane gasoline was consistently demonstrated through late 1944 and into early 1945. Fighter groups equipped with the upgraded fuel reported both higher victory counts and lower losses. By March 1945, nearly all P-51 units had transitioned to 150-octane fuel. Combat records from this period reveal overwhelmingly one-sided engagements, with German fighters rarely able to mount effective opposition. When aerial battles did occur, German forces typically sustained heavy casualties. By April 1945, Allied missions over Germany often encountered no aerial resistance at all. The Luftwaffe had effectively been neutralized, depleted by attrition, chronic fuel shortages, and the systematic loss of experienced pilots who could not be replaced. On May 8, 1945, Germany officially surrendered, marking the end of the air war over Europe. This absolute air dominance was the result of multiple factors. the long-range capability of P-51 Mustangs, superior American pilot training, and overwhelming numerical strength. However, the technological edge provided by 150-octane fuel played a crucial role. The distinct purple gasoline transformed capable aircraft into exceptional performers, boosted pilot confidence, and embodied the combined industrial and scientific power of nations that could outproduce, out-engineer, and ultimately outlast their adversaries. In aerial warfare, speed is a decisive factor. Aircraft that can outpace their opponents dictate the terms of engagement. They can strike on their own schedule or retreat before facing serious danger. This velocity advantage grants pilots tactical options that slower adversaries cannot match. By late 1944, American fighters gained a clear edge through a combination of superior aerodynamic design and access to high-grade fuel, sharply reducing the maneuvering choices available to the Luftwaffe. The operational conditions of the two sides were strikingly different. Allied pilots were capable of flying several sorties per day, constrained primarily by human endurance and aircraft maintenance needs. German pilots, however, often remained grounded simply because they did not have enough fuel to take to the skies. When they did manage to launch, strict fuel conservation protocols dictated their actions. Exceeding these limits in combat could leave a pilot stranded far from base, regardless of tactical success. By contrast, Allied airmen could exploit full engine power whenever required, confident that enough fuel remained to return safely. This disparity created profound operational flexibility for the Allies. With abundant fuel and reliable logistics, Allied fighters could sustain continuous patrols, respond aggressively to enemy activity, and maintain pressure over contested areas without pause. The Luftwaffe, constrained by dwindling resources, had to select their engagements carefully and often disengage not because they were defeated, but because their fuel reserves dictated it. For German pilots, every mission carried the additional uncertainty of whether there would even be enough fuel for a subsequent sortie. Allied pilots, in contrast, flew with the assurance that their machines, support networks, and fuel supply could support extended combat operations. This material advantage translated directly into combat effectiveness. Allied airmen executed more daring maneuvers, achieved higher mission success rates, and enjoyed better survival odds. The reliance on high-quality 150-grade aviation fuel is more than a technical detail. It represents the industrial backbone of aerial strategy. It illustrates how logistical and technological superiority can shape not only individual battles but the broader conduct of war, allowing one side to operate with freedom while forcing the other to fight under severe constraints. Victory in the skies of Europe during World War II was determined not merely by the number of planes a nation could field, but by the quality of those aircraft, the effectiveness of the fuel they used, and the depth of their pilot reserves. Success required more than adequate resources. It demanded an abundance of highly trained airmen supported by an industrial system capable of replacing aircraft and personnel faster than the enemy could inflict losses. While American and British chemists and petroleum engineers never flew combat missions themselves, their innovations in fuel formulation and refining had a decisive impact on aerial combat, enabling Allied pilots to outperform. When a P-51 Mustang pilot advanced the throttle and felt the aircraft surge with unmatched power, it was the result of painstaking chemical engineering. Engineers had transformed crude oil into specialized aviation fuels that enhanced engine performance, giving Allied pilots a tangible edge. German strategists had expected American fighters to perform within predictable limits based on standard aircraft designs and conventional fuel, but they encountered planes that exceeded those expectations, powered by a fuel supply network so extensive and advanced that it represented a strategic advantage Germany could not replicate. By the spring of 1945, as Allied forces swept across Germany from both east and west, the Luftwaffe had effectively lost its capacity to operate as a coherent air force. Remaining German units flew sporadically, often constrained by insufficient fuel, and even jet innovations such as the Me-262 appeared too late and in numbers too small to alter the course of the air war. Pilots with experience had already been systematically eliminated in previous battles, leaving Germany unable to exploit its technological advances. The cumulative effect of Allied superiority became unmistakable. American P-51 units conducted hundreds of thousands of sorties across multiple theaters, claiming around 4,950 enemy aircraft destroyed in dogfights, along with an additional 4,131 destroyed on the ground. These figures reflect not only the immediate loss of aircraft, but also the depletion of trained German pilots, the erosion of combat experience, and the waste of industrial capacity in producing replacements that were quickly neutralized. While high-octane aviation fuel alone did not secure victory, it provided a crucial margin that transformed difficult engagements into decisive outcomes. A properly boosted P-51 could reach speeds of 448 mph, a combination of velocity, engineering excellence, and industrial power that Germany could not match. Fuel chemists working far from the battlefield had created a weapon as significant as any cannon or bomb. The purple-dyed gasoline they developed influenced the course of air combat just as profoundly as superior tactics or pilot skill. Air supremacy over Europe in 1945 was determined not only by aircraft design and pilot training, but by the meticulous optimization of piston engines, the chemical properties of fuel hydrocarbons, and the ability to deliver unprecedented performance numbers. The Mustangs that patrolled the skies over Berlin in early 1944 were formidable aircraft. Those flying the same routes a year later were powered by fuel that dramatically enhanced their capabilities faster, stronger, and more resilient. The difference, quantified in octane ratings, manifold pressure readings, and airspeed indicators, was one of the subtle yet decisive factors that determined the outcome of the air war in Europe. In this intersection of science and industry, the fate of Nazi Germany was sealed, demonstrating that victory could flow not only from bombs and bullets, but from a purple liquid carefully engineered to transform potential into aerial dominance one mission at a time.